In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine decided that Rome was no longer the best place to run the Roman Empire, too far from the wealthiest provinces, too exposed and too unstable. So instead, he picked a Greek city called Byzantium, a modest place on a narrow strait between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Those who control it could tax trade between continents as well as move armies between Europe and Asia in days. He renamed it Constantinople, officially New Rome. De facto, it was still Rome, just smarter. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, this eastern half didn't. It kept the bureaucracy, the tax system, and the army. And most importantly, it kept the money. Modern historians call it the Byzantine Empire. However, its people didn't. Yeah, they called themselves Romans, right up to the final day. But let's leave that for now. For centuries, Constantinople was one of the richest cities in Europe. The Theodosian walls wrapped around it like layered armor. Outer wall, inner wall, towers, moat, an urban fortress. Many armies tried and many failed. The Persians, the Arab caliphates, Bulgars, Slavs, steppe nomads, none was able to capture the city. The empire lost land, regained it, and lost it again. The overthrow of emperors in the Byzantine Empire deserves its own spotlight. Emperors were overthrown with almost theatrical creativity, palace intrigues, midnight conspiracies, betrayals at every turn, all staged like a drama. Some emperors were strangled, some poisoned, some simply locked away. But more often, instead of killing a political opponent, people chose to blind them, to the point when blinding someone became so common that it was almost a political tool. Blind a rival, and he can't rule. And yet the state survived. It could still collect taxes, it could still pay soldiers. The real fracture came in 1204. The Fourth Crusade was supposed to go to the Holy Land, but it ran out of money. So instead they attacked Constantinople. Western Crusaders stormed the richest Christian city in the world. They looted it, burned it, partitioned it. Trust between Eastern and Western Christianity, already fragile, collapsed almost permanently. The empire eventually retook the city in 1261. But something structural had broken. Fewer taxpayers, less land, weaker armies, Italian merchants dominating trade. By the mid-15th century, the empire was mostly Constantinople itself, parts of the Peloponnese, and scattered fragments. The population of the capital had fallen from hundreds of thousands to around 50,000. Inside the massive walls, entire districts had become farmland. The fortifications were still colossal, but there wasn't enough manpower to defend them. Meanwhile, a new power had been expanding relentlessly: the Ottoman state. It absorbed much of Anatolia, then large parts of the Balkans. By the 1400s, its territories in Europe and Asia were separated by one inconvenient obstacle: Constantinople. For the Ottomans, it was unacceptable: a fortified island in the middle of their own territory. So when in 1451, Mehmed II became Sultan at 21, given how educated, patient, and ambitious he was, he understood exactly the value of Constantinople. It would unify Ottoman lands. They'd finally control the Bosporus completely, remove a potential base for Western intervention, and claim the prestige of conquering Rome's last capital. They just couldn't resist such a temptation of privileges. The city had survived for centuries because of its walls. Only outnumbering wouldn't be enough. It never was, in fact. So Mehmed heavily invested in his artillery. Gunpowder was already reshaping siege warfare across Europe. Mehmed simply decided to scale it up. A Hungarian engineer named Orban had previously offered his services to the Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI. Heavy cannons capable of breaking the Theodosian walls. The emperor could not afford him, but Mehmed could. That opportunity was decisive. In Edirne, massive bombards were cast. One of them, later known as the Basilic, was enormous by 15th century standards, over 8 meters long, made out of bronze, firing stone projectiles weighing hundreds of kilograms. It fired slowly and was unreliable, but when it hit, nobody questioned its necessity. For centuries, walls discouraged attackers. Now walls could be worn down long before the final advance. Mehmed assembled an army likely exceeding 60,000 troops. He built a fleet to blockade the city. In 1452, he constructed Rumelihisara on the European side of the Bosporus, a fortress designed to control maritime traffic and prevent reinforcements from the Black Sea. Inside Constantinople, the imbalance was obvious. Emperor Constantine XI had around 7,000 defenders under his command. Among them were Byzantine soldiers, Genoese troops under Giovanni Giustiniani, and small Venetian contingents, all very experienced and motivated, but their capabilities were limited. The land walls stretched roughly 22 kilometers. The defenders faced an impossible task of defending this wall with 7,000 men. Constantine XI appealed repeatedly to Western Europe, but the church schism, political rivalries, and plain self-interest meant no major relief force would arrive. By April 1453, the situation was no longer ambiguous. On one side, a fortified but underpopulated city. On the other, a centralized state with artillery, manpower, and strategic control. On April 6th, the siege began. Ottoman artillery opened fire. The sound alone was unprecedented. The bombards were slow and inaccurate, but precision was not the goal. Focus was more on the cumulative damage. Day after day, the same sections of the Theodosian walls were pounded. The walls did not collapse immediately, since they were built in depth. But artillery changed the rhythm of the siege. Instead of waiting for starvation or betrayal, the attackers could now repeatedly create breaches and exploit them. Inside the city, repairs became a nightly ritual. Earth, timber, stone, anything available was used to somehow strengthen the walls. Civilians joined soldiers on the walls. Every morning, the bombardment resumed. The Golden Horn, a narrow inlet separating the city from Galata and serving as its main northern harbor, was sealed by a massive chain, blocking the Ottoman fleet. Mehmed's response was simple. If ships cannot reach the harbor by sea, they will reach it by land. Ottoman engineers prepared a greased track over the hills north of Galata. Ships were hauled overland and launched into the Golden Horn behind the chain. It did not end the siege immediately, but it forced the defenders to stretch even thinner. On the evening of May 28th, fighting paused. Inside the city, religious services were held. Greek Orthodox and Latin clergy stood together. The theological disputes that had divided them for centuries were seamlessly forgotten. Before dawn on the next day, the final assault began. Mehmed organized the attack in waves. First, irregular troops to exhaust the defenders, then Anatolian units to press the damaged sectors. And in the final wave, he sent his elite infantry, janissaries, disciplined and professional. But by that time, the defenders were already depleted. Giovanni Giustiniani was seriously wounded near the main breach. He withdrew toward the harbor. Defenders' coordination weakened, and roughly at the same time, Ottoman forces gained entry through a compromised section of the defenses, often associated with a small gate known as the Kirkaporta. Once attackers reached the inside of the defenses, reversal became nearly impossible. The garrison was too small. Constantine XI was urged to retreat, but he didn't. He remained in combat and was killed during the fighting. His body was never conclusively identified. The last Roman emperor died on the walls of his city. What followed was typical of 15th century siege warfare: looting, killing, enslavement. Later that day, Mehmed entered Constantinople. Looting was curtailed. Administration reorganized. Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, a visible symbol of transferred sovereignty. Constantinople became the Ottoman capital. Over time, it would become known as Istanbul. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 intensified Ottoman dominance over the eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. Trade routes shifted. Western European powers, facing new constraints, increased their search for alternative maritime routes. One empire closed its chapter, another began writing its own.